with better writing and so forth, this could have easily been a better film. I don't think they needed to throw this entire film out to make it a better Godzilla or King Kong movie. I think with some very reasonable adjustments to the plot and so forth, and with the budget that they have, they could have done so much more. Do you agree, Biologist Wild Trees?
Because there's a lot, the movie has a lot going for it. Number one, I mean, like, there's obviously an audience for this type of thing. The movie's doing very well. Number two, we really praise the creature design, which arguably is a very important, aspect of these movies. It's the creature design, the animation, the characterization of the monsters, little details, like some of these creatures having mange, some of the warrior apes having cataracts. So there's these, and then the actors are very charismatic. They're good actors. I think the sets are really good. The look of the inner earth is really good. So you have all these things that are really good, and you have the audience. But if you could just tighten up the plot a little bit, which is funny because the plot, I've always said that, like, the script probably costs the least of all these movies. You know what I mean? Like,
yep,
it's just paper. It's just ideas on paper. That's all it is. I mean, if you already have the budget, for the movie, the script, it's one of the simplest things. You're a little pessimistic about the next movie. We both agree they're probably going to make another MonsterVerse movie because of the way this one's performing. Although we have to see what the drop off is, but I think it's close to breaking even at least, and that's not really including merchandising. There's a lot of merchandising out there which makes money. You're a little pessimistic because you're thinking that perhaps the next one will not learn from the mistakes and it'll just drop down in quality even more. And hopefully, with these kind of conversations, we could see the opposite. We see an uptick. Now, historically, that doesn't happen. Historically, these movies just keep getting worse. We see that with a lot of franchises, but I don't know. You never know. At least we're pointing out the deficits that can be easily fixed.
So that sets up the final stuff of Godzilla Kong. After Godzilla and Kong go back to Hollow Earth, switching back to Godzilla -1, the main character at his low point goes to a meeting where they explain Japanese government is not going to help them deal with Godzilla because they'd rather just suppress information and realize they just don't have the resources to honestly beat him. So a bunch of ex-Navy and ex-Army and just general ex-military people get together to say, we are going to have to save our country. We're going to have to find a way to beat Godzilla. So they designed this plan to say Godzilla is a creature of the ocean, and he's a deep sea creature. And the idea is if we can basically sink him really quickly down to the ocean, the pressure differential, even though he's used to living down there, changing that pressure so rapidly will damage him, because basically any other living creature on Earth, if you have that high of a pressure change going from low pressure to high pressure, that's going to either kill you or outright disable you. And if that doesn't work, then they're going to do the reverse, is they're going to take him from high pressure up to low pressure, depressurization, which can be equally as deadly. So that is their plan. And what I love about this movie is that it is a serious movie, but doesn't take itself too seriously, because the main protagonist in the film, as he's listening to this plan, he asks the same question that I think anyone in the audience of Godzilla -1 was asking themselves, which is this guaranteed to kill Godzilla? And let's say that's a question that is basically never asked in kaiju films. Even though the audience commonly will think it is like, is this plan really going to work? But it actually is. It is directly verbalized by the main protagonist. And usually if that is asked, the answer is always yes. It 100% is going to work, and then usually it doesn't. But the main scientist in this movie basically says, I cannot guarantee that it will work, but this is the best plan we have, which I think was awesome, because those were two factual statements. They don't know if it's going to work because Godzilla is a unique organism. Like, who knows if that's going to work? And secondly, no one else has a better plan. So why not, right?
It's not a good plan, but it is a plan. Do you have a plan? It's better than no plan.
Exactly. And they later have a scene where the main characters are eating dinner together. And that's actually something they ask, and they start drilling holes in his plan. Like, well, what if Godzilla does this, or what if Godzilla does that? And finally, the dude's like, "Do you have a better plan?" And they're like, "No, I don't." And he's like, "Thank you." So I love that. I love that back and forth because I guarantee that's what the audience members are thinking. So I think that's a little bit of the director and the writers, like breaking the fourth wall a little bit, if you will, to be like, yes, kaiju fans, like this is probably what you're thinking, and debating amongst yourselves and trying to drill holes in this plot. And they're like, it's okay because we're acknowledging that this is not the, yes, general, admiral, Air Force people. This is going to work 100%, and then it never does because that's how kaiju films work. So I think that was a very good moment. But also when they're having that dinner, they confront the main protagonist character to be like, hey, you keep asking if the plan doesn't work. Do you have an airplane? And maybe you're going to kamikaze kill Godzilla. And they basically are like, are you trying to make up for the loss of the main female lead? And he's like, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. What does it matter to you? And they're like, oh, well, you should have expressed your love to her before she died. And he's like, don't you think I wanted to, but I couldn't? And they go, well, why couldn't you? Why didn't you express your love for her? And he's like, because for me, the war is not over. Which I think anyone who has been to war has PTSD, or if you know someone who's been to war, you know what that means, which is he is struggling with the PTSD and mental shock of World War II. And that's shown throughout the film. He wakes up with nightmares and cold sweats, etc. And I think he feels until he gets his mental house together, until he gets himself together, he cannot give himself into a relationship. Which even if you haven't been to war, even if you haven't had PTSD, if you're just going through struggles in your life, whether it be physical, mental, I think we can all relate to that to say, how am I to try to be a good husband, be a good boyfriend, be a good girlfriend, be a good wife, just be a good significant other if I am struggling with so much that I cannot give myself to another human being? Do you agree, Biologist Wild Trees?
Yeah, not only do I agree, I can empathize for sure. I've been in that position for sure. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of people have been in that position where they're just maybe they're stretched too thin, or they're having their own issues mentally or physically or medically. That it really does make you feel isolated in that way, because you feel like you don't have anything left. You don't have enough for yourself. Let's say you don't have enough emotional support for yourself. How could you possibly give that to someone else?
Exactly. And I like the word you use there, empathy, because I think that's what's really driven in these scenes, is that I empathized with them. Like I am not a war veteran or anything, but I've certainly had mental struggles in my life. And I've been in that scenario to be like, oh, maybe there were relationship opportunities I passed up because I felt I wasn't ready for it, because I didn't have myself together. So I think there was a great empathy there. By contrast, that is something that could have been explored in Godzilla Kong with regards to adoptive relationships in the sense of Dr. Andrews and Gia. I think that is something that could have been deeper, of like those connections of in our world, in the real world, if you are adopting someone from another culture, like if you were in America and you're adopting a child from Africa or adopting a child from Asia, you're bringing them out of their mother culture, trying to integrate them. And especially if they are of a teenage age, like Gia is in this movie, how difficult that can be of growing up in another culture and now being brought to a new one. That is something that they could have dug deeper into. And I think that would have created a more empathetic relationship with the audience members. But did they do that, Biologist Wild Trees?
No, they did not. Did not focus on that. The most emotional scenes I got, and the most teary-eyed I got, was during the scenes with the adopted mother and adoptive daughter. But I didn't crack a tear. Like, I got teary-eyed, but I did not crack a tear. So I don't think they pushed it far enough. But it's interesting. You're pointing out, like, they have all these opportunities. They just didn't take them. But they had all the setups there.
Exactly. So they have this plan, and then They set out to get these Navy ships that have been decommissioned, have no weapons on them, to use them to attach CO2 gas-filled devices to sink Godzilla and also balloons to elevate him if needed. They acquire a experimental Japanese airplane, which actually did exist, but was definitely experimental and was not used in World War II. They point that out in the movie that the war ended before it could be used. And it's a unique design because it's a reverse propeller, because it has the propeller at the back of the plane instead of the front, which aerodynamically, it has some other disadvantages to having a propeller in the front of the plane, which is why that was not widely used throughout the world. This is a Japanese innovative engineering thing that they did with aviation, even if it didn't get to see the light of the day because the war was over. So I think for the Japanese people, that was a big pride point to point out something that they had done, which was innovative that no other country was doing at the time, which I think was really cool. And that sets up the final act of leading to the confrontation with Godzilla. In that moment, the plot is very much so playing on this idea that the main male character feels like he may need to sacrifice his life to kill Godzilla. And he basically plans to put a bunch of bombs into the airplane, and if he needs to, just fly it into Godzilla and blow Godzilla up, the last resort. And there are a lot of scenes that kind of wish back and forth in the sense of his mental state of does he feel like he needs to do this because he feels mentally depressed and because he feels guilty for surviving World War II, but he also has this orphan daughter who he's taking care of, and he makes scenes to say I want to build a better life for her, or I want to live to see her have a better life. So you see him very torn on, he seems to be regaining hope in humanity and regaining hope in his life, but also realizing he still may need to sacrifice himself to beat Godzilla. So that becomes this major plot point of is he going to sacrifice his life? Is he not? And you continue to get these mixed messages because he leaves a note for a neighbor of his to take care of the orphaned daughter while he's out on his mission. And he also leaves her a bunch of money, which implies maybe he doesn't plan to come back. So leading into this confrontation with Godzilla is A, are they going to kill Godzilla? And B, if they do, is the main character going to live? And I think that's very good emotional drama that's going on, because usually the conclusion of these films is really centered on the monster, but now we're really feeling very grounded real world implications if Godzilla is not defeated, or if Godzilla is defeated but he dies. Do you agree, Biologist Wildtrees?
Yeah. That's interesting you pointed that out. So yeah, there's two different things that we're expecting to see. We're wondering about. The stakes are doubly high. We have the individual's life and what he's going to do with it. What is he going to have to do with his life? Is he going to have to sacrifice it? And then what is the fate? What is the fate of Tokyo as well, or Japan as a whole? So yeah, that's pretty interesting. They kind of double those up.
Exactly. So then we go back to Godzilla Kong. So we have the confrontation. Scar King, Shimo, and the ape army shows up in the back door of the Iwi tribe. Godzilla, Kong show up with Mothra, and the confrontation begins. The Iwi do this combining of two pyramids to create this anti-gravity field, which sets the stage for kind of a pretty cool battle. But they explain that they're doing the field to try to prevent the Scar King and Shimo from getting to the surface. But the field lasts for maybe a few minutes. And they do have a cool anti-gravity battle, which has really never been done, I think, in kaiju history. Or if it has been done, it's probably a lesser-known kaiju film. But I certainly never seen that before, and I thought that was very visually impressive. But the reasoning behind it doesn't make a lot of sense, because as soon as the anti-gravity field wears out, which they told them it would only last for a short period of time, they end up going to the surface. Question mark. Well, I don't know if that makes more sense to you, Biologist Wildtrees, or if I missed something in there that makes more sense, but that just didn't make a lot of sense to me, other than to be someone in the script writing room was we need an anti-gravity scene, make it happen. Yeah. It's the more we try to make sense, the less sense it makes in the end. So they end up going to the surface, and then I just feel like this fight is just not very well choreographed at all. Shimu and Godzilla fight, and they basically just exchange their heat ray and ice ray, which is in stark contrast to how Godzilla has fought almost any monster in this series up to this point, which is he usually prefers to get up and down and dirty with them. Like, yeah, he'll use his atomic ray, but he usually likes to get into melee with them, as he would traditionally do in a lot of other Godzilla movies too. I don't know why they didn't do that, but it just seemed more like a Dragon Ball Z fight with two Kamehamehas hitting each other rather than like what you would expect from a kaiju fight. So that was really strange. And then Kong very handedly is beating the Scar King with his upgraded Power Fist. So that becomes a much more one-sided fight compared to what we saw earlier. I don't remember exactly why, but they end up switching to where the Scar King ends up fighting Godzilla, and then King Kong is fighting Shimo, which is even, in my opinion, more weird and choreographed and boring, because all Shimo and Kong do is Shimo shoots ice and Kong blocks it with his fist for a very long time. And not really much else happens there. Godzilla similarly breaks the Scar King's whip, and then proceeds to just try to death ray him for the rest of the time. And Scar King is just dodging the death ray. So you basically just have two monkeys, apes, dodging respective or blocking respective beam attacks from the other monsters.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just don't feel like that was well thought out. And then because the Scar King's whip is destroyed, he has the crystal that he was using to control Shimo, which he and Kong battle over. And eventually Suko, the baby Kong, takes a big axe and smashes the crystal, which then frees Shimo from Scar King's control. Kong then holds Scar King up, freezes him, and then smashes him and kills him. And then the conclusion of the film, Godzilla goes back to sleep in the Coliseum. Kong goes back down to the Hollow Earth. There's a brief emotional moment where Dr. Andrews is concerned that Gia is going to want to stay with the Iwi. And I feel like this is another lost emotional moment where it's like, this could have been a big question. And I would argue this could have been set up to be as big of an emotional question as what we're about to go over in Godzilla -1. So Godzilla -1 set up like, is he going to die? Is he not going to die? And the ramifications of that happening. I would argue they could have better set up this. Is Gia going to want to stay with the Iwi? Is she not? The problem is with this is she chooses to stay with Dr. Andrews in a touching moment of saying like, you are my home, I don't need to be with the Iwi. But I feel like they could have, in the time they spent with the Iwi, given that kind of back and forth emotional draw that you saw with the protagonist of Godzilla -1 with regards to, is he going to have to sacrifice himself? So they could have easily done some scenes where Gia is interacting with the Iwi and like she's finding that some of the cultural things that did in Skull Island matches what they do in Hollow Earth. So she then begins to build connections with them. But then contrasting, there could also have been some things they do at Hollow Earth they didn't do at Skull Island. And in those moments, it kind of weirds her out, and maybe that causes her to gravitate more to her mother. So you could have these contrasting scenes of like where the Iwi cultures match up, where they don't match up, or maybe there's more to this weight of her being the quote unquote chosen one to bring Mothra back. And that causes her to confide more in her mother, to get emotional support. So that leading up to this scene of like, are you going to stay with the Iwi or are you not? We really don't know what's going to happen. But because none of that emotional investment was done, it's simply, hey, are you going to stay or go? I'm going to go with you, Mom. And then they just end it. Do you agree, Biologist Wild Trees?
Yeah, pretty bare minimum, basically. Yeah.
And do you agree, like, to this point in the film, as we haven't finished with Godzilla -1, do you feel they could have matched that emotional moment of Godzilla -1, this question of, is he going to sacrifice himself or not? They could have matched that emotional moment of Gia making this decision.
Yeah, now that you pointed out, yeah, and I see, and you also mentioned how they could have done it, which was by just spending more time with that storyline and maybe adding some more scenes So putting more emphasis on that conflict, because that is the main human conflict, I believe. That's the main emotional draw of the movie for the humans is this: will she stay, will she go? Will this family be separated by literally the crust of the earth? But yeah, they could have spent more time on it, and it could have had that impact.
Exactly. Exactly. So then we go to Godzilla minus one. So their plan is to lure Godzilla into this deep trench and they're going to sink him down. So they start luring him, but he ends up destroying the ship that was supposed to lure him in. And he ends up making landfall in Japan, which is not what they planned. They did not plan for him to make landfall again in Japan. So they end up needing the main protagonist to use his plane to bring Godzilla around, which creates a very unique scene because we've seen Godzilla fight a lot of planes in a lot of different movies. But this is the only time we've seen Godzilla fight one plane that was super agile. And it's very interesting because in other Godzilla movies, basically what he would do is bat it down with his hands and then use his death ray. And that was basically it. But in here, he uses his hands. He tries to catch in his mouth. He tries to hit him with his tail. Like he tries a bunch of different things to try to get this plane. So we get to see interactions, even though we've seen ad nauseum Godzilla fight planes for the past 70 years. We've never seen him fight a plane like this or fight a plane that is of this caliber. So I thought that was really interesting, and that they were able to make this scene, which could on its surface be very boring, all of a sudden become very interesting. In retrospect, do you see that engagement in that scene where they're trying to lead Godzilla back out to sea, Biologist Wild Trees?
Yeah, I remember that scene vividly. I remember how close the calls were. And it's something I appreciated too was you got to see Godzilla's face, high definition face right in the sunlight. They didn't shy away from anything. And he looked realistic. And I like how I remember there's a lot of scenes where that plane is just like inches away from being snapped by his teeth or just like slips right between his fingers. He's like clawing at it and stuff. But yeah, those were done very well.
Absolutely. So he successfully leads Godzilla out, and we know Godzilla's biggest weapon is this atomic ray, which in Godzilla minus one, it is the most powerful. Like, no offense to Godzilla and Godzilla Kong, his death ray is very powerful in that film, but it's not nuking a city like it is in Godzilla minus one. So the humans plan ahead. They're like, hey, we need to prepare for this. But what's funny is they don't tell you, the audience is unaware of this. The audience is unaware they're preparing for this. So Godzilla shows up and immediately starts charging his death ray. And you're like, oh, they're already screwed now. Like, he's charging up the death ray. But they had set up a dummy ship that had nobody on it for him to blast, to waste his death ray on, which a weakness of having the strongest atomic ray or death ray in the series is that Godzilla minus one Godzilla has to recharge it for a long time. He can't just keep going and blasting it like he does in all the other Godzilla movies. And that is a big moment because, yes, he blows up that ship. And then you can see that for the first time, that's when a lot of the military, these ex-military people who are working to stop Godzilla get to witness the death ray. And a lot of them are like, oh man, we are so screwed. There's no way we're going to beat that. And then the scientist character is like, no, like he needs time to recharge. Like, this is our moment. This is our window. And that's when they all come together to say, okay, now let's get this done. And they have great music during this scene, great music when the ships start going. And they are still using the airplane and the main protagonist to distract Godzilla while they're stringing together these canisters to sink him. And what I like about it is the plan doesn't go exactly according to plan. Like, they've already had Godzilla land when he shouldn't land. They did not get to practice this maneuver of tying up Godzilla. So as the ships are crossing each other to complete the looping trap, they actually partially run into each other, which I thought was really cool because they didn't have to do that. Like, they could have just made them perfectly past each other, but that was like some little extra drama going on, which adds good tension to it because you're like, oh man, are they going to hit each other? Are they going to scrape enough damage where maybe one of them sinks? Because again, we've already seen the plan not work already. So is it not going to work further? Did you feel that same tension when the ships were going by each other and the captain was yelling, "Brace, biologist, wild trees"?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it almost adds to the kaiju action because it's like they're not giant monsters, but they're giant ships, interacting. So it's kind of like ship versus ship. But yeah, it's like what I'm noticing with these comparisons is like evolving is the word I use, or they keep adding to all the conflicts. They don't keep it simple. So, like I said, the main protagonist, he experiences adversity after adversity after adversity, and even with this final scene, it's like there's just different layers that are compounded, and that adds to the tension and it keeps it fresh. But yeah, that was a really good touch.
Exactly. So then they successfully tie him up. They sink him. He doesn't die. They're trying to raise him up, and they almost get him to the surface. And then they struggle to get him all the way to the surface because he chews off some of the inflatable balloons. So they're like, "Oh man, we can't fully pull him up." And then the younger character from earlier in the film brings some tugboats to help them pull, which is a very cool moment because earlier in the film, there is much like, "Hey, we don't need y'all's help," but yet they still come to help. And this is the help of non-military people. So now you have ex-military people trying to deal with Godzilla and regular civilians also helping to deal with Godzilla. So I think that's very poignant, like the Japanese population coming together to beat Godzilla. They successfully bring him to the surface, but it's still not dead. And then now he's charging up his atomic ray. And you get to see it in all the characters' faces on the ships, like, "Up, we're screwed now." Like we're all gonna die now. And some of them are like taking their hats off and they're hugging each other and saying their goodbyes. And then here comes the main protagonist character in his plane, and he rams himself right into Godzilla and blows his head off. And it's a very dramatic moment because you're like, wow, like he really got in there and hurt Godzilla, but it's also like, did he live? And then we see there's a parachute. So unlike in World War II, they changed and modified this plane to have an ejector seat because the Japanese did not have ejector seats in World War II. That's why they had such heavy casualties of their pilots. So that was a huge deal that he was able to blow up Godzilla's head, and Godzilla falls apart, kills Godzilla, and he lives, and he's a big hero. So this is a huge moment. Everyone's happy. Godzilla's defeated. And an important point here as well is as Godzilla is dying, the members of this crew actually pause and they all salute him, which as an outsider, you may be like, why are they saluting him? Like this guy was trying to kill him, etc. And what it comes down to is they respect Godzilla for what he is. They understand that he is like a wild animal. It's not like he had this intent of destroying Japan, etc. Like he is as much a victim of circumstance of a nuclear bomb as they were of World War II. So you see that there is this idea that yes, Godzilla is an enemy, but we can still respect him in the end, which let's just say is not given to the Scar King and Godzilla Kong, A New Empire, is it? Biologist, wild trees.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I was thinking the exact same thing when I was watching the movie. I was like, that would be a good scene. That would be a good time to still live the Scar King.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But to be fair, they don't set up the Scar King to be very respectable in the end. So just with how he's characterized. But again, a missed moment of like, could they have done more with that? That once the villain's defeated in the monster verse, they just kind of throw him to the side and move on, which that's apparent in all of them, whether it be the Mutos, whether it be the Skull Crawlers, whether it be King Ghidorah, whether it be Mechagodzilla. It's like they're dead and they're done. Then we get back to shore, big celebration, Godzilla's dead. And then the main protagonist gets a message that, in fact, the female protagonist who we thought was dead is actually not dead. She did survive, and she's recovering in a hospital. She's obviously badly injured. Half of her face is bandaged. Her arms are heavily bandaged, and she's in a sling. And it's this great reuniting moment. But then the camera zooms in at the end, showing that she has these black veins on her neck, heavily implying that she's likely dying of radiation poisoning. which was a big moment and a big part of the first Godzilla film. In the very first Godzilla film, 1954, after Godzilla hits Tokyo for the first time, there are multiple scenes where you have small children, you have heavily burned adults, etc., where doctors are coming up to them with Geiger counters measuring radiation levels, and they're all off the chart. Implication, no one says anything during these scenes, but the implication is that all these people are going to die of radiation poisoning, which I will point out, for as much as they talk about radioactive readings, which they talk about in every single MonsterVerse movie, they never talk about that side effect ever. They were like, oh, Godzilla spent time sleeping in the Coliseum. I guess we're going to see a bunch of radiation deaths in Rome. They never talk about that. So that's something I've always found interesting, is that has been at the very beginning, the very first Godzilla movie ever made that was done. And both the Japanese and the American Godzilla movies selectively ignore that when it is convenient for them.
Yeah. And what I like about that the -1 scene at the end one is it's very subtle. It's not in your face. And I don't know, I just like that. Like I took my mom to see the movie, and my mom didn't notice it, and I didn't point it out to her because it allowed my mom to have a happy ending without anything else souring it. But if you're paying attention, or a little bit about science, then it adds that layer. Just keeps you thinking about the movie. You're like, well, what is going to happen? And I think a sequel has been announced. Is that true? They said they are going to continue with this universe. The -1.
There is another movie coming. I don't know if it's officially a sequel to Godzilla -1, or if it's just another Godzilla movie. That I'm not sure about. But yeah, they're definitely making another one. Toho will, which unclear when it will be released. But it's happening, and that's where I'll give my final verdict, which is to say, obviously, Godzilla -1 became the first and only Godzilla movie to be nominated and to win an Academy Award in 70 years of Godzilla, for all the reasons that we discussed. Ironically, for visual effects, which in comparing and contrasting these two movies, Godzilla -1 won that award on a $15.0 million budget, compared to Godzilla Kong, which I doubt will get nominated for any Oscars, including visual effects, but was made on a $125 million budget. So almost 10 times more. And I would argue, do you think, now knowing Biologist Wild Trees, that Godzilla Kong: A New Empire had 10 times the budget of Godzilla -1, did it have 10 times better visuals?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, people don't really look at it that way, but no, it did not have 10 times better visuals. Then, yeah, and I don't know, like, if you look at just impacts, you exclude the fidelity. I don't know. If you just look at the impact that the visual effects have on you, then I don't think it's not even close. Yeah, the way the way the special effects were. I mean, just that one scene where Godzilla picks up the train car, to me, that visually is more impressive than anything in New Empire. And I mean that. It really is. It's just the tension, how real it feels, like how, because the other thing is, a lot of the scenes in -1 were shot almost like in an interactive kind of way, where like, it's almost like first person perspective. So you really feel like you're there, including that scene. Like, the shots were like, wow, I feel like what it would feel like to be in this train car. But yeah, no, definitely not 10 times more visually impressive.
Exactly. And that's where, for these reasons, Godzilla -1 is definitely a good Godzilla movie. In fact, it is a masterpiece. It is universally, at this point, either the best Godzilla movie ever made, or at least one of the best ever made. And Godzilla Kong: A New Empire has not been out long enough to fully flesh out, but based on more critical reviews, we would argue it is not just one of the lesser end MonsterVerse movies. I would argue it is one of the lesser end, not the worst, but a bad Godzilla movie, for the reasons we've discussed. And again, for viewers who enjoyed it, who were entertained by this movie, it's fine. but you can have a movie that is objectively bad that is still highly entertaining. Again, for myself, Terror of Mechagodzilla, the last Godzilla movie, the Showa era in the 70s, it is a terrible Godzilla movie. It is a terrible movie, but God, I love it. It is so entertaining. I can watch it forever. And it is okay to say that. The other thing I will point out to anyone who was highly entertained with this movie, the things I pointed out that could have been changed about the plot, all those things that could have been changed about the plot of Godzilla, Kong, A New Empire could have been done. And I strongly believe you would still be equally entertained with those changes. And the reason I point that out is it is not mutually exclusive to have an entertaining Godzilla movie that is also really good. Godzilla Minus One certainly achieved that. Within the MonsterVerse, Kong Skull Island certainly achieved that. I believe Godzilla, Kong, A New Empire could have achieved that. You could have been just as entertained and yet still gotten a far better movie if the script had been focused on trying to be a good Godzilla movie and a good kaiju movie. Do you agree, Biologist Wild Trees?
Yeah. After listening to you describe the plot, you were basically a script doctor, and you fixed the script for A New Empire. And it was little things that wouldn't have added anything to the budget. It was just a few more dialogue scenes here. But yeah, I do agree. It could have, people could have still enjoyed the crowd pleasing, clapping out loud moments, but also been more emotionally invested with some simple tweaks to the plot, the human plot.
Absolutely. And with me giving the opening comments, Biologist Wild Trees, you should get the closing statement.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we're in an interesting time in history right now. We had a worldwide pandemic. We have, worldwide inflation. We have wars going on. And we have these two movies that came out really close to each other. And people are enjoying both of them. One of them, Minus One, is dark. It's emotionally gripping. It's not something I don't think children could go watch it, but teenagers could watch it, or older kids. And then you have New Empire, which is doing well. And I know why I enjoyed it at first watching is because I was with, my 8-year-old relative, and I got in that mindset, and I had a huge crowd behind me in the IMAX theater. They were all cheering and clapping. And I don't know, I really think it's just because of the escapist elements of the movie. I think people want to take a break from the real life, just like the Avatar movies did as well. But still, they deserve better. And you deserve better as well. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with enjoying A New Empire. Like I said, I enjoyed it, but I will say, having talked to Dr. Blalock here, I do see the flaws with it, and I do see how those flaws could really affect the franchise as a whole, and we shouldn't settle for that. We should demand better. And it's not a lot that we're asking for. It's just small plot changes that could make it more emotionally invested in the movie.
Absolutely. All Godzilla fans, regardless of why you like Godzilla, and all Kong fans, regardless of why you like Kong, should demand better, because we have gotten better in the past, whether it be American or Japanese movies, and we deserve better in the future, especially for us spending our hard-earned money to watch these movies.
Yeah, and that's the other thing you said. It's like shrinkflation is hitting a lot of things, but I put my foot down when it hits our Godzilla, King Kong movies, because we're paying the same amount or maybe even a little bit more now for the movie, but we're getting less Kong, less fighting. And yeah, that's not right.
It's all right, folks. Don't settle for it. Vote with your wallets.